That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil, and brought forth grain, some 100, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Jesus continues. "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word and yields nothing. But as for the one sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100, another 60, and another 30. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So as I said, at this point in the gospel, Jesus is beginning to teach in parables. The parables are these strange stories that take things that we know about, or at least the disciples would. Most of us are not farmers. But things that the disciples would have understood and known about: planting, family matters, weeds, and the like. But then Jesus always, in every one of these parables, twists them in just such a way that leaves them thinking, there must be more to it than we knew. He alters what is normally expected. Now, every parable serves basically two functions beyond just the story within it. The first is to keep us thinking and wrestling with what Jesus has talked about. Because when we are confident, when we are sure, when we know something well, we often miss things. We're so used to seeing and understanding the world that we forget to notice the slight changes around us. But by teaching in these ways, Jesus leaves us thinking. I think I understand, but it just feels just beyond our ability to fully grasp the parable itself. And because of that, it forces us to go back again and again to say, what on earth was this about? That's one function. The second function really is subversive speech. It's a way of telling a story so that those who can really hear it can hear it, and those who can't will not. It's a way of talking so that the authorities may not hear what you're really saying when you're talking about things like a brand new kingdom is coming and everything around us will be torn down to the ground. And those in power often don't get excited about that speech unless they're the ones wanting to tear it all down. However, since this is the first parable, Jesus actually takes the time to explain to the disciples because, like us, they don't quite get it. Yields of hundreds, 60, 30 is beyond anything they could have ever imagined. These were planting folk. They understood. The best yields they often got were around 7 to 10%. So, here's what Jesus says in the parable. Just to recap, because you heard it. The sower represents God. And the seeds are the Word of God. And the soil is humanity. I think you got that. And each one of the pieces that keep the seeds from growing is an impediment to long-term growth. They're the things that keep us from growing deeper in the life of faith, remaining faithful, hard soil, and birds. Those are the things that simply do not hear. Folks hear it and just don't hear it, aren't interested in it, and just move on. The rocky ground, though, is for those who lack a depth of faith. And what we mean is being really excited about something in the faith, but not having enough understanding of the history and the Bible and our teaching, because when things get really tough, then we just give up. The thorns are the cares of the world and the lure of wealth. That's about as blunt as Jesus can make it. And then the good soil. That is what grows tangible fruit in the life of faith. We all know that. Now, on this point, the issue of soil, right? We have to be careful because Jesus' followers are always busy wanting to figure out who's good and who's bad and making sure that we're on the right side of things. We're really good about sorting out those who are elect and those who are not, even though we're told repeatedly not to do it. So I have to make a caveat about soil. Just as we talk about it, we can't look around and go, man, their soil's not particularly good. Notice what Jesus does not say. He doesn't say, let us figure out who is good soil and who is not. He does not say, any one of these groups will burn in the eternal fires of hell. He does not say these people are rejected by God. What he's saying is these are the reasons I will be rejected. What Jesus is teaching really is a reminder and a calling. A reminder is that there will be challenges in the life of faith. Following Jesus is not about everything going the way you expect. I don't know how we can think that when it ended with a cross and an empty tomb. The story is not about sorting other people out. It's a reminder of the ways in which we can wither in our own life of faithfulness. When we seek to follow Jesus, these are the ways in which we can fall down and lose our way. So it is a calling to go back to the basics. And this is the very beginning of the teaching. So he's reminding them that it has to begin in the basics. If there's anything that we can control in our lives, it is the conditions of our minds and hearts. It is those two which are off limits for others unless we let them in. What can get in the way of our faithful journey is pretty clear in this parable. When we are closed-minded and so certain about the way things are, we are at risk of withering away. When we do not attend to the roots of our faith, we are at risk of withering away. And when we put our hearts and our minds on accumulation and worldly adulation, we are at risk of withering away. Nobody does these willingly. They seem to sort of creep in here and there. It's sort of like the weeds in my yard that one day look so small and the next are as tall as I am. I'm not making that up. You can find it. Jesus does not say these things in and of themselves are bad. They are just out of order. He's saying that they have the power to keep us from growing deeper in our own life of faith, tending to our soil in real time is something that does not happen overnight. Taking care of real soil does not happen overnight. It does require our attention. It is like the weeds in my yard. If you do it regularly, it really isn't that difficult. But if you let it go, for whatever reason, the job is way more difficult. Little things in our life of faith. Little things. Praying, worshiping, fellowshipping, studying the Bible, serving other people are things that do not need to be heroic or difficult, but they are the very ground on which we are building our faith. Going from never reading the Bible to deciding you're going to read it from beginning to end is a recipe to end somewhere about Numbers if you make it that far. I fall down there every time. I've read the whole thing, just don't read it in order. Never praying, except when you're in trouble, and then deciding I'm going to pray 5 times a day. It's a recipe for failure. Not knowing how to get started. wanting to make changes, wanting to grow deeper in the life of faith really can begin with small, simple tasks. And if you don't know where to start, the good news is that's actually part of my job description to help out. I really am open to talking about that. I believe we all need someone with whom to be accountable. I am accountable myself for the ways in which I attend to my own spiritual life. So it doesn't have to be me, but it is important to have folks with whom you are saying, I am attending to my faith. When I think about amazing stories grounded in simple tasks, which is really what I think is at the heart of this, I think about a little town in France, what they did during World War II. They defied the Nazis and the Vichy government, and they protected 4,000 Jews. Openly defied them, but they did hide them. They hid them in their homes. In fact, one who lived and survived said, no one in the town ever bothered to ask if I was actually Jewish. It didn't matter. In fact, this little town, this tiny little town, was the center of all the forged papers for those refugees fleeing the occupied France and Germany. This tiny little town. We also know that the pastors, their pastors in that town, took stances against the persecution as it was getting started. In fact, we know it was these Protestant pastors who stood against the deportation of Jews at the highest levels of power, even though they were ignored. When the rest of the Christian church said nothing or stood for those bringing the Holocaust, this little Protestant village did something different. And since the 1980s, which is when the story finally came out, because they didn't talk about it, folks have been fascinated. What made them different than all the other folks? Well, it certainly wasn't just because they were Protestants. We know better than that. Something else was going on there. But when speaking to those in the town, even today, they don't think of themselves as heroes. In fact, they don't talk about it much. The question has been asked again and again, what is it that made them different? Why did they do what could have cost them their lives? What was it about these Christians that they were willing to risk even death to provide hospitality? In a 2008 article in the Christian Science Monitor about the village, this was the answer, quote, most locals are Huguenot descendants, Protestants driven out of Catholic France in the 17th century. They were deeply devout, and they studied scriptures daily, end quote. That's what they said, because they knew the stories of their faith. Now, I'm not saying that the only way to be moral, the only way to be part of the change in the world is to read the Bible daily. Even once in a while would be better than never at all. But I do think that their attention to the stories of our faith was the difference between them and the Christians who saw no issue with conflating Nazism and Christianity. Those who lost their way because they had no root decided, yeah, this is great again. I believe that all of us live our lives based on stories. Stories we tell ourselves about who we are and how we want to be in the world. Some of those stories we have chosen, many others were given to us in a way that we're not even fully clear on yet. I believe we are called to feed ourselves on the stories of our faith, the stories of love, the stories of resistance to the pharaohs of the ancient world might just lead us to resistance to the pharaohs today. You too were once strangers in a foreign land, so you will welcome them into yours. When we know that story without having to go back into Leviticus to find it, it is in there, by the way. It is then we won't think twice about resisting when they try to get rid of the refugees. Feeding the hungry, stories about feeding the hungry, knowing that Jesus was at the center part of his ministry, it won't seem strange when we advocate for stopping using food as a weapon The other thing they said that this small town had was a healthy distrust of worldly powers. There was a sense that Messiah is not coming in the form of any elected leader. That at the end of the day, they are sinful like we are, and the more power you have, the more sin you have the ability to enact upon the world. So they just knew. They had a stance. They understood, because they too had themselves in this village once been refugees. It wasn't just during World War II. In fact, they had done it many times throughout their history. And during the Spanish Civil War, they hid folks there too. This, I believe, is what is at the heart of our faith. This idea of knowing our stories. So that when we're called upon to do things that may not be necessarily heroic, it just becomes part of our lives. When we say that the Word of God has power, that village in France serves as a reminder that that's not just talk, but that is concrete. Most of us will never be asked to house people fleeing persecution. We might. But because there are people who flee persecution today. And the thing is, the Bible has something to say about that, and it isn't protect your own. And our Protestant family in France is a living testimony to the power of our faith. What we know is they tended to their soil again and again. And then they shared it with the next generation, saying, tend to your soil, because this is who we are and what we do. They tended to their soil so that when the time came, when they were called, they acted. They offered hospitality. They knew what was required. So too are we. Not as a compulsion, you should be reading the Bible. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, these are the stories of our faith that bring life. And there are plenty of folks out there who are using the stories of our faith to not bring life. And we have to, as one of my professors once said in seminary, you just have to know it better. It's true. We may never be asked to be heroic. But then, if we are, and we have attended closely to our faith, it won't really seem heroic at all. It will just be what followers of Jesus do.